My parents forced me to cook and clean all weekend for my sister's party with 50 guests. When I asked for help, Mom laughed, "You're the only one without a real job." I smiled, put the dishes down, and left. 1 hour later, my sister called crying. "Who did you call?" My mother introduced me to my own boss as the unemployed one. She said it loud. She said it the way people say things they've been saving up, with a small, satisfied smile, like she was correcting a rumor. 40 guests in the backyard, string lights overhead, the smell of the chicken I had marinated overnight still on my hands, and my mother, in her good navy dress, gesturing at me like I was a cautionary exhibit. "This is Emily," she said to the tall man in the gray blazer, "the unemployed one. She's been so helpful this weekend, haven't you, sweetie?" I was holding a tray of mushroom crostini I had assembled at 10 a.m. My feet had been aching since noon. There were 47 guests at this party, and I knew the exact number because I had counted the place settings I'd laid out by hand. The tall man in the gray blazer looked at me. His name was Victor Hale. He was the regional director of Hartwell Freight Systems. He was also the man who had approved my last performance review, where he had written, "Emily Carter's operational leadership has been among the most consequential contributions to the regional division this quarter." He was my boss, and my mother had just called me unemployed to his face. I held the tray steady. I kept my expression exactly neutral. Victor's eyes met mine for exactly 1 second, just long enough for both of us to register what had happened. And then he looked at my mother with a polite smile and said, "What a lovely home." My mother beamed. She moved on. I stood there for another 3 seconds. Then I set the tray on the kitchen island, took off my apron, folded it over a bar stool, and walked out through the garage. I sat in my car in the dark, and I called him, "Let me back up, because the party is not where this started." This started on a Thursday night, 3 weeks into October, when my mother called me at 8:47 p.m. and said, "We have a small situation with the caterer." I was sitting on my couch in the condo I lease in Midtown, eating leftover soup, watching something on my laptop. I manage the central and southeast shipping corridors for Hartwell Freight Systems, which means I oversee 11 regional hubs, 37 employees, and multi-million-dollar contracts across 4 states. I had been in back-to-back calls since 7 a.m. My feet hadn't left my desk until 4:15. I was tired in that particular way that has less to do with sleep and more to do with the sustained weight of being responsible for things that matter. "What kind of situation?" I asked. "Donna canceled," Mom said. Donna was the caterer. She was very unprofessional about it, very last minute. "When did she cancel?" A pause. "Tuesday. It was Thursday." "Mom, the party is Saturday." I know. But listen, you're so good in the kitchen. You know Madison's guests, and you care so much about everything being perfect. It would mean the world to us if you could just step in and—" "I have a job," I said. Emily. Her voice shifted into that particular register. Soft, a little wounded, the one she had used since I was 11 years old to indicate that I was disappointing her by having boundaries. "It's your sister's engagement party. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. I'm not asking you to cater a stranger's wedding. I'm asking you to help your family." I said I would think about it. By Friday morning, she had already texted me a grocery list. My sister Madison is 3 years younger than me. She is beautiful in a specific, effortless way that has always made rooms rearrange themselves around her. She got engaged to Preston Webb in September. Preston being the kind of man whose family name appears on hospital wings and whose handshake always lasts exactly the right amount of time. The engagement party was Madison's idea. The guest list was Mom's. The venue was our parents' house in Clearwater Hills, which is a large, well-maintained colonial that Dad renovated himself back when Carter and Sons renovation was still mostly residential work. I drove up Friday evening. I told myself it was one weekend. I told myself it was for Madison. I arrived at 6:30 p.m. to find the kitchen completely unprepped, a handwritten menu on the counter with 17 items on it, 3 bags of groceries that didn't match the menu, and a note from Madison that said, "Can you also do a charcuterie? P's mother is obsessed with those." "Thank you." I made a list. I drove to the store. My mother was in the living room reviewing seating charts. My father, Harold Carter, founder and CEO of Carter and Sons Renovation, which had been doing primarily commercial work for the past 6 years, was on the back porch with a glass of bourbon and his reading glasses, looking at what I later realized were architectural schematics. Neither of them came into the kitchen. I cooked until midnight. I made a pasta salad, marinated 2 sheet pans of chicken thighs, prepped vegetables for roasting, assembled 3 dozen deviled eggs, made a dipping sauce from scratch because Mom texted at 10:30 to say, "Madison's future MIL doesn't eat store-bought anything," and cleaned every dish I used before I went to bed in the guest room because the cleaning supplies were in the hall closet, and it seemed like no one else was going to get them. At 11:15, Dad wandered into the kitchen for a water glass. He looked at the spread on the counters, the labeled containers, the marinating sheet pans, the mise en place I'd set up for the morning, and said, "This looks great, Em. You really are amazing in the kitchen." He went to bed. I stood there for a moment and thought about the 11-hour day I had just put in at work, the portfolio review I had rescheduled so I could be here, the 4 separate conference calls I had taken from my car during the drive up. I thought about the fact that no one had asked me, in 6 years of professional life, to name my highest skill. And yet here in this kitchen at 11:15 on a Friday night, the family consensus was clear. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. Saturday morning, I was up at 6. Mom came into the kitchen at 9, looked around at the spread I'd assembled, and said, "This looks wonderful. Can you also do the flower arrangements?" The florist left them in buckets on the back porch and they need to be done by noon. I did the flower arrangements. At 10, Madison emerged in a silk robe and stood at the kitchen counter eating a yogurt while I arranged dahlias, and she said, "Em, can you do those sort of cascading? Like messy, but on purpose?" I said yes. She posted a story about getting ready. I kept arranging. At 10:30, Madison's friend Kayla arrived to help Madison get ready, and they disappeared upstairs with a bottle of Prosecco and a curling iron. Kayla said, "Oh, wow, it smells amazing in here," to me as she passed through the kitchen. This was the only acknowledgement I received from Madison's entourage all day. By 11, I had completed the flower arrangements, transferred the marinated chicken to the oven in 3 staggered batches so everything would come off hot at the same time, assembled the deviled eggs on a platter with the small, precise garnish Mom had texted to request. Something green, not just paprika, Madison's FMIL is a food person, laid out the charcuterie board, and made 2 corrections to the tablecloth placement because Dad had decided at 10:45 that the long table should be repositioned. I set 47 places. I ironed the tablecloths. I vacuumed the living room because my mother noticed a streak near the baseboards and said, "I'd do it myself, but my back." Madison floated through at intervals. She was getting her hair done. She was getting her nails done. She texted me twice, once to change the chicken from thighs to breasts because Preston's mother didn't like dark meat, which meant I had to make a second grocery run at 1 p.m. My 3rd trip to the store in 2 days, and once to ask if I could move the whole appetizer setup 6 feet to the left because it reads better visually. I moved it 6 feet to the left. At 2 p.m., I sat down for the first time on a folding chair in the garage because every indoor chair had been repositioned for the party. I ate a piece of bread and drank half a glass of water and looked at a shelf of old paint cans for approximately 4 minutes. Then I went back inside. I didn't ask for help because every time I had in the past asking for help had resulted in a 20-minute conversation about how I was being oversensitive and ungrateful and how Madison had so much on her plate right now, and wasn't it nice that I had the flexibility? You work from home, Emily. It's not like you have a real schedule. I work from home 3 days a week. The other 2 I'm in the office. I manage a 9-figure shipping corridor. But I have flexibility, and in this family, flexibility means availability, and availability means you're the one who shows up. The guests started arriving at 4. By 5:30, I had made 2 trips to the kitchen island with empty trays, refilled the ice bucket, redirected a catering assistant my mother had hired for light help, who spent most of her time talking to the bartender, and fixed a serving spoon situation that Madison described as a whole thing. My feet were beyond pain at this point. They had entered that numb, distant zone that means you've been standing for 11 hours, and your body has simply stopped sending updates. I was walking a tray of mushroom crostini through the back patio when I heard my mother's voice. "Victor, I'm so glad Harold could convince you to come. Let me introduce you. This is Emily, the unemployed one." Smile, smooth, like she hadn't even thought about it. I stood there with the tray. Victor Hale looked at me. I kept my face still. Victor said, "What a lovely home," and my mother moved on. 3 seconds passed. I set the tray on the kitchen island, folded my apron, walked through the garage, got in my car. I sat in the dark for 90 seconds, just breathing. Then I picked up my phone and called my boss. He answered on the second ring. "Emily, I need to be honest with you about something," I said. "I canceled our dinner meeting Wednesday because my family asked me to come home and help with a party. I've been cooking and cleaning since yesterday afternoon. I'm sorry for rescheduling, and I'm calling because my mother just introduced me to you as the unemployed one, which you obviously already know is not accurate, and I'm not sure what to do with that." Silence on the line, not uncomfortable. Victor was not an uncomfortable silence kind of person. He was the kind of person who treated silence as something worth using. "Emily," he said finally, "is your father Harold Carter, Carter and Sons Renovation?" My stomach dropped exactly the way it does when an elevator starts moving. "Yes," I said. "He called me 6 weeks ago," Victor said, "about the med supply build-out. We've been in preliminary discussions. He invited me tonight specifically to talk about the bid." I looked at the back of my parents' house through the windshield. Every window glowing. The sound of the party, muffled and cheerful. 6 weeks. My father had been cultivating this for 6 weeks. The party wasn't just for Madison. It was an opportunity. Madison's social capital, the beautiful house, the right kind of guests, the right kind of atmosphere. And I had been the labor that made the atmosphere possible. The servant who held the trays while Dad made deals. "I didn't know," I said. "I believe you," Victor said. A long pause. "Should I leave?" he asked. I looked at the house for another 3 seconds. "No," I said. "Go inside." I hung up, started the car, drove home. I need to explain who Victor Hale is, because understanding what happened next requires understanding what it means when someone like Victor pays attention to something. Victor has been regional director of Hartwell Freight Systems for 11 years. Before that, he spent a decade in commercial logistics with 2 other firms, both of which he left on good terms, which in logistics is rare enough to be notable. He is thorough, quiet, and methodical in a way that people sometimes mistake for passivity until they've watched him take apart a contract negotiation like a surgeon. He is also, I have come to understand, someone who treats small things seriously. The first time I realized this was during my 2nd year at Hartwell, when I noticed he had written a half-page handwritten note to our facilities coordinator after she stayed late to fix a HVAC issue before a client visit, not an email, a handwritten note. I thought about that for a while. I had been his most productive regional manager for the past 3 years. We had what I would describe as a professional relationship built on mutual respect and, more more importantly, mutual competence. He knew what I could do. I knew how he worked. When I submitted recommendations, he read them carefully and asked specific follow-up questions, which in my experience is the clearest signal that someone is actually thinking and not just checking a box. When he said, "I believe you," I knew he meant it in the literal, factual sense, not as reassurance, but as assessment. He had also, in that brief exchange on the patio, watched my mother introduce me as unemployed while I stood there with a tray I'd been carrying for 2 hours. Victor is a very observant person. He later told me, months later, in passing, that the moment he noticed was not the word unemployed. It was the fact that I kept the tray perfectly level. "You'd been holding it for a while," he said. "Yes," I said. It didn't waver. I drove home, made tea, sat in my kitchen and waited. The missed calls started at 6:15. Mom, then Dad, then Madison, then Mom again, an unknown number, then a gap, and then Madison's name again. The text came at 6:34. "Emily, what is happening? Dad is outside with that man and Mom is in the bathroom. Also, Mom is crying. Who is that man to you?" I put the phone face down and finished my tea. At 6:42, Dad called from Madison's number. His voice was the voice he used for serious things. Not angry, not yet, but compressed, careful. "Emily, hi Dad, get back here." I went home. "I need you to come back to this house right now." "I'm not going to do that." A pause. I could hear party sounds in the background, muffled, someone laughing, the clink of glasses. "Victor Hale is asking questions," he said. "Then answer them." "Emily." A longer pause. "He corrected your mother in front of the group she was standing with. He told her your title." I let that image settle. My mother's face, the smile freezing, her friends watching. "He said you manage 37 employees across 4 states," Dad said. "He said you've been with Hartwell for 6 years. He said your corridor is responsible for one of their highest performing regional contracts." Another pause. "Your mother didn't know. She knew enough to humiliate me," I said. "She just didn't know it would cost you." The line went quiet. "Emily." His voice dropped further, softer. This was the voice I had trusted when I was a kid. The voice that had read me stories, that had taught me to drive, that had said, "I'm proud of you" when I got my first promotion. I recognized it. I also recognized now how many times it had been used to smooth over something that deserved to be examined. The med supply contract. I've already hired 2 crews. I've already ordered materials. If Victor walks away from this because of, if tonight goes wrong, I'm looking at 6 figures in sunk costs. That's not my responsibility, I said. "You could fix this." I went home, Dad. "You treat someone like hired help all weekend, they go home. You were helping your sister." I was running a catering operation alone for 47 guests for 2 days. I scrubbed the baseboards, Dad. I ironed tablecloths at midnight. "You're making it sound worse than it was." Mom called me unemployed to my boss in front of 40 guests. She didn't know who he was. She knew who I was, I said, and she decided that was enough information. Silence. Longer this time. "What do you want me to say?" he asked. "I don't want you to say anything. I'm telling you what happened. What happens next is up to Victor." "Emily." His voice had shifted again. No longer soft, not quite hard, somewhere in the deliberate middle. "What exactly are you planning to do?" I picked up my mug, took a slow sip. "Monday morning," I said. "Victor is going to ask me to submit a written assessment on whether Hartwell should recommend Carter and Sons for the med supply build-out. That's standard. Hartwell requires an internal review from the ranking regional manager when we consider new commercial partnerships." Dead silence. "And I'm going to write it," I said. Honestly, I could hear him breathing. "I'm going to write about what I know," I continued, "which is the quality of Carter and Sons' previous work, their timeline record, their insurance status, their industry reputation, and anything else that's relevant to a legitimate partnership review. I'm going to write what I actually know, Dad. Not a favor, not sabotage, just the truth." More silence. "That's it?" he said finally. "That's it." He exhaled. "And if the truth is good enough, then you have nothing to worry about." I hung up. I want to be precise about what happened next, because I know how these stories can read. Like the protagonist had some elegant plan all along, some chess move strategy they were running while everyone else stumbled around. That's not what this was. I did not go home Friday night with a scheme. I spent 2 days cooking my family's food and ironing their tablecloths because I love them, and because I had always been the one who showed up, and because part of me had not yet stopped believing that eventually they would see it and be grateful. What I did have was a clear head and a specific skill set. I had spent 6 years assessing operational risk for a living. When my mother called me unemployed in front of my boss while I was holding a tray of food I'd spent 2 days preparing, something shifted in how I was looking at the situation. Not anger, something more like clarity. I was not going to fold this time. Sunday I spent at home. I went for a long run in the morning. I made breakfast. I did laundry. At 11 a.m., I got a voicemail from my Aunt Roberta saying she'd been at the party and she was just checking in the tone people use when they want information. I didn't call her back. At 1 p.m., my mother texted, "Can we talk?" I waited 3 hours and texted back, "I'm available Tuesday evening." She read it and didn't respond. Madison texted at 4 p.m., "Emily, please call me. I'm so confused about everything and Preston's mom asked me what was going on and I didn't know what to say." I texted back, "I'm okay. Congratulations on your engagement." She sent back a question mark. I put the phone in my bedroom and went to make dinner. Monday morning, I got to the office at 8:05. Victor was already in. He was always already in. His office light was on, his door half open. He had a coffee from the place on the corner that he got every morning. Medium, dark roast, nothing in it, and he was reading something on his screen when I knocked. "Come in," he said. He looked up. "Close the door." I sat down across from his desk. The desk was clean, the way it always was. A few folders, a yellow legal pad with handwriting on it, his phone face down. On the wall behind him was a framed photograph of a cargo vessel, which I had always thought was an odd choice for an office decoration, and had eventually decided was exactly right for him. "Before we discuss the assessment," he said, "I want to ask you something, and you don't have to answer." "Okay. Is this the first time something like Saturday happened?" I looked at the cargo ship. "No," I said. He nodded once. "Okay." He picked up the legal pad. "The med supply build-out. Carter & Sons bid came in last month. Your father's firm has a commercial track record that goes back 12 years. 3 of those jobs I've been able to verify through Hartwell subcontractor files. We used them twice for warehouse expansion work in 2019 and 2021. Their work was adequate. No major issues. Timeline on the 2021 job ran 11 days long. That's consistent with what I know," I said. "Dad's crew is good. His project management has gaps. He tends to underestimate the tail end of large builds. How material would that be for a med supply build-out? Depends on the scope. If it's a phased completion structure, timeline overruns could create penalties. If med supply has opening deadlines, which, given the medical supply context, they probably do, 11 days becomes significant." Victor wrote something on the legal pad. "Your assessment. I need it in writing by Thursday. Standard format, standard criteria. Nothing outside the scope of a routine review. I understand. I don't want you to tank it, Emily. I also don't want you to protect it. I want the honest picture. That's what I'll write." He looked at me for a moment, not unkindly. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm sorry about Saturday. You didn't do anything wrong." "No," he said, "but I watched it happen, and I said, 'What a lovely home,' which in retrospect was not my finest response. Something I hadn't expected happened, which was that I laughed. Actual, quiet laughter. The tension-breaking kind that shows up when you're not ready for it." Victor almost smiled. "Thursday," he said. "Get me the honest picture." I spent Monday and Tuesday working through the assessment. Standard professional analysis. I pulled Carter & Sons' Dun & Bradstreet report, their licensure through the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, their insurance certificates on file from the 2021 Hartwell job. I pulled the timeline documentation from that project, including the internal Hartwell project notes that detailed the 11-day overrun and its cause, supply chain coordination failure on the contractor's end. I also pulled their Better Business Bureau file, which showed 3 unresolved complaints in the past 4 years, all from residential clients, all involving similar language around project scope creep and communication gaps. None of them were disqualifying on their own. Together, they formed a pattern. I contacted 2 former project managers who had worked alongside Carter crews on commercial builds, not my father's employees, but independent contractors who had shared sites with them, and asked for informal assessments, which they provided. James Okafor, who had worked a 20x20 office complex build in St. Pete, where Carter & Sons was a subcontractor, was diplomatic but clear. Good crew on the ground. The super was sharp. But when it came to change orders and schedule adjustments, I always needed to follow up at least twice to get a response. Vera Dominguez, a project coordinator who had overlapped with a Carter crew on a commercial renovation in Sarasota in 2022, was more direct. They do good work if the project doesn't move. The minute something changes, they slow down. I cross-referenced this with the med supply build-out specifications that Hartwell's procurement team had shared with me as part of the assessment brief. The project involved a 22,000 square foot medical supply distribution facility with a phased completion structure, shell by month 4, fit out by month 8, operational by month 11. The contract included penalty clauses for missed phase milestones, $8,500 per day beyond deadline. The picture that emerged was what I had already known. Professionally speaking, Carter & Sons was a competent regional contractor with a strong on-the-ground crew and a consistent weakness in large-scale project logistics. For a straightforward build, they were fine. For a time-sensitive, penalty-bearing medical supply facility build-out with phased completion requirements and daily penalty clauses, they were a moderate to significant risk. I wrote that, all of it, in the standard format, with citations, with documentation, with the timeline data and the risk matrix our department used for contractor assessments. 9 pages. Every claim sourced. The conclusion restrained, specific, and honest. Based on available documentation and industry reference, Carter & Sons renovation demonstrates adequate technical capacity for this build-out. The primary risk factor is project management consistency under phased schedule pressure. Recommend Hartwell pursue additional performance bonding requirements and milestone review mechanisms if partnership proceeds. That was it. Not a demolition, not a protection, a fair picture. I did not add a single word about my mother's party. I did not mention the tablecloths or the crostini or the word unemployed. It wasn't relevant. It was also, I realized, not where my power was. My power was in the accuracy of the document. That was the only thing I had ever actually had. My mother called Tuesday evening, as I'd said she could. She started with the kind of opener that telegraphs an apology is coming, but has not quite arrived. "I just want to understand what happened on Saturday, Emily. I feel like there was some kind of miscommunication. Mom," my voice was quiet, "you introduced me to my boss as unemployed. I didn't know who he was. You knew who I was. You introduced me as unemployed. You said it like a joke in front of 40 people while I was holding a tray of food I'd been cooking for 2 days." A pause. I was trying to be funny. I know. That was the part that was hardest to explain. Not Not that she was cruel exactly, but that she had done it casually, without thought. Because in her mental map of the world, I was the daughter who was available, the one who showed up, the one without a real job or a real schedule or real commitments that matched Madison's real life. It wasn't malice. It was a model of who I was that I had spent years failing to correct. I need you to understand that it wasn't funny, and I need you to understand that it had consequences. For your father's business, she said. Her voice had cooled slightly. For me, I said, it had consequences for me. Silence. Your father is very stressed, she said. I know. He worked very hard on that bid. I know. If Hartwell doesn't move forward, Mom, I cut her off gently. I'm not going to sabotage Dad's bid. I'm doing my job, which is writing an honest assessment of the contractor. That's it. Whether it helps him or hurts him depends on the actual work, not on how I feel about Saturday. She was quiet for a long moment. Emily, she said finally, I'm sorry. About what I said, I didn't mean to embarrass you. The apology landed, and I sat with it for a second, feeling the weight of it and also the weight of everything it didn't include. All the years of you're so flexible, and Madison has so much going on, and you don't mind, do you, Emily? The apology was real, I thought. It just wasn't complete. Thank you, I said. Are we okay? I looked at my kitchen window. October dark outside, the tea going cold on my counter. We will be, I said, but things need to be different. She said she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe it would take longer. These things usually do. I submitted the assessment Thursday morning at 9:04 a.m. Victor read it by noon. He scheduled a follow-up call with the med supply procurement team for the following week. He did not tell me the outcome of that call because he didn't have to. The assessment was my work product, and what the company chose to do with it was above my level of authority. What I know is this. 3 weeks later, my father called me. Not from Madison's phone, not with the compressed, careful voice. He called from his own number on a Wednesday evening, and when I answered, he said, Hey, hey, Dad, a pause. Carter and Sons didn't get the med supply contract. He said it plainly, not accusingly, like he was stating a weather report. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. And I was. In the specific, complicated way you can be sorry about something that was also, on some level, fair. Victor's team cited project management concerns, Dad said. Specifically phased timeline reliability. Another pause. I read the language. It was thorough, professional. I didn't say anything. Emily, his voice shifted into something I hadn't heard in a long time, something quieter. I had you working the kitchen all weekend while I was trying to land that contract, and I didn't tell you why I invited him. And your mother, he stopped. We handled that badly. Yes, I said. You did. I'm sorry. I looked at the ceiling of my condo. Outside, I could hear traffic, the familiar sounds of my own life, the life I had built, the one that had looked from my parents' house like nothing. Thank you for saying that, I said. We talked for another 20 minutes. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a scene from a movie where everything gets repaired in one phone call, but it was a beginning. Tentative and honest, two things my family had not always managed to be simultaneously. Madison got married the following April. I was a bridesmaid, which meant I showed up to the rehearsal dinner and the ceremony and the reception, and I ate the food that someone else had cooked, and I danced. And at the end of the night, Madison found me near the exit and hugged me for a long time without saying anything. I hugged her back. She had sent me a long text in November after everything had settled. She'd written that she hadn't understood at the time how much she'd taken for granted, that she'd always assumed I didn't mind because I never said anything, that she'd never really thought about what it meant that I was always the one who showed up. She wasn't wrong. I had trained them in a way. I had been so reliable for so long that my reliability had become invisible, just part of the landscape, like furniture. The person who shows up becomes the person who is always available, and the person who is always available becomes the person who doesn't have real commitments, and the person who doesn't have real commitments is the unemployed one. What I know now, what I have to keep knowing, because it's one of those truths that requires maintenance, is that being good at something doesn't obligate you to sacrifice yourself for it. I am a good cook. I am also a good logistics manager. Neither of those facts means I owe anyone unlimited access to my time or my labor or my self-respect. I told Victor this once, not as a confession but just in passing, during a quarterly review when we got briefly off topic. He thought about it for a moment. That's accurate, he said. Then he went back to the Q3 numbers, because Victor is Victor. I am writing this 14 months after my mother said the word unemployed in a backyard full of hearty guests, while I stood there in a dress that smelled like chicken marinade, holding a tray I'd spent 2 days preparing. Here's what I want you to understand. The moment I walked out was not the moment I became someone different. I had been someone different for years. I had just stopped performing the version of me that my family found convenient. The apologies came. The relationship repaired, slowly, imperfectly, the way real repairs go. My mother still occasionally makes comments she doesn't think through. My father still underestimates timelines. Madison still sends texts in all caps. These are people I love, and they are imperfect, and so am I. But no one has called me the unemployed one since. And the next time someone hands me a menu at 10 p.m. on a Thursday and says, "You don't mind, do you?" I'm going to think about a gray blazer and a cargo ship on a wall and the specific, clarifying feeling of walking out of a party and into your own life. And I'm going to say, actually, I do.